France, March 1943. A Gestapo officer reaches across his desk. His fingers close around what appears to be an ordinary bar of chocolate wrapped in silver foil. Cadbury's branding, authentic packaging, the kind of luxury item that's become rare in occupied Europe. He brings it to his mouth. In 3 seconds, he would have been dead. The explosive concealed inside contained enough force to kill anyone within a 2-meter radius. The device had a designation that still sends chills through former intelligence officers, number 73. But the British War Office had a different name for it. They called it the explosive slab. The concept violated every convention of warfare established since the Geneva Protocol, a weapon designed to look exactly like food.
A device that weaponized the most basic human impulse: hunger. By early 1943, the Special Operations Executive had already developed dozens of concealment devices: explosive coal, booby-trapped wine bottles, tire bursters disguised as animal droppings. But nothing approached the psychological impact of explosive chocolate, because chocolate represented something more than sustenance in wartime Europe. It represented comfort, safety, a connection to peacetime normality. The SOE understood this perfectly. The question that dominated the initial design meetings at Station 15 was deceptively simple. How do you make an explosive device that passes every possible inspection whilst remaining stable enough to survive handling, temperature changes, and the rough conditions of clandestine distribution? The answer would require some of the most sophisticated materials engineering of the entire war.
But the core problem went deeper than engineering, because for the explosive chocolate to work, it had to be discovered, it had to be taken, it had to be consumed. The entire concept rested on exploiting a psychological vulnerability that every person shares, the assumption that familiar objects are safe. Station XV operated from a requisitioned country house called the Thatched Barn near Barnet in North London. The facility had previously served as a roadhouse restaurant. By 1942, it had become Britain's primary special devices laboratory. Major Charles Newington ran the technical section. He'd worked in theatrical special effects before the war. That background proved invaluable, because creating convincing camouflage for explosive devices required an understanding of how people perceive authenticity.
At Newington's team included chemists, engineers, and former stage magicians. They approached each project with one guiding principle: the device must be discovered and still work. The explosive chocolate represented a particular challenge. Real chocolate had become scarce in Britain by 1942. The civilian ration had been reduced to 2 ounces per person per week. Military chocolate came in a distinctive dark composition that tasted deliberately unpleasant. It was designed for survival rations, not enjoyment. German and Italian occupation forces in France and North Africa had better access to genuine chocolate through requisitioned supplies. This created an opportunity, because a bar of authentic-looking chocolate would be valuable enough to steal, pleasant enough to share, and familiar enough to disarm suspicion. But first, the technical team had to solve 3 distinct problems.
How to replicate the appearance of chocolate exactly. How to conceal enough explosive to guarantee lethality. How to prevent premature detonation whilst ensuring the device functioned when required. The development process began with genuine Cadbury's dairy milk bars. The team purchased several dozen through neutral channels. They measured every dimension, documented every printing detail on the wrapper, analyzed the texture and color of the chocolate itself. The goal was forensic-level accuracy, because if the disguise failed at any point, the entire concept collapsed. The outer wrapper proved relatively straightforward. The printing team at Station XV had already mastered document forgery. Replicating a chocolate wrapper required the same attention to detail but simpler security features. The challenge lay in the chocolate shell itself.
Because the device couldn't simply be an explosive brick wrapped in foil, it had to feel right, weigh right, even smell right if someone unwrapped it for inspection before consumption. The solution involved a steel container machined to precise dimensions: length 102 millimeters, width 51 millimeters, depth 12 millimeters, the exact profile of a standard Cadbury's bar. The exterior of this container was coated with a mixture that combined cocoa powder, milk fat, and binding agents. Not edible chocolate, but something that looked and smelled convincingly like chocolate to cursory inspection. The coating was textured to replicate the characteristic segmented appearance of a dairy milk bar. 8 segments across, 4 segments down, 32 individual squares,
each one carefully formed. Inside the steel shell sat the explosive charge, Nobel's 808 composition, a plastic explosive developed specifically for SOE operations. It contained 80% RDX and 20% mineral oil. The consistency resembled modeling clay. It could be molded to fit irregular spaces. More importantly, it was remarkably stable. It wouldn't detonate from impact, friction, or moderate heat. The 808 required a proper detonator to function. This stability was essential because the chocolate bars would travel through multiple handlers. They'd be dropped by parachute, carried in pockets, potentially subjected to rough treatment. A sensitive explosive would kill the agent transporting it long before reaching its target. The detonation mechanism presented the final challenge.
The answer involved a pressure-sensitive switch connected to a spring-loaded striker. When someone applied force to snap off a segment, the switch closed. The striker fired into a number 8 detonator. The detonator initiated the main charge. Total time from breaking the chocolate to detonation, less than 1 second. The pressure required was deliberately set low, approximately 3 kilograms of force, the equivalent of a firm snap, because the team couldn't risk the target failing to trigger the device through gentle handling. But there's something that makes number 73 particularly disturbing when you understand the full design specifications. The explosive force was calculated to kill reliably within a 2-meter radius. The fragmentation pattern from the steel container extended further, up to 5 meters.
The device was designed to be handled at close range, often indoors, in confined spaces where the blast effects would be maximized. Officers' quarters, staff cars, command posts, anywhere a valuable item like chocolate might be taken and consumed. The psychological warfare aspect extended beyond the immediate casualties, because once German security forces discovered what appeared to be explosive chocolate, every bar of real chocolate became suspect. Supply lines were disrupted. Trust was eroded. The mere existence of such a weapon had strategic value beyond its direct military application. If you're finding this deep dive into British special weapons development interesting, subscribing helps ensure you don't miss the next examination of covert technologies that changed warfare. Because the explosive chocolate was just one device in a comprehensive program that included.
Production of number 73 began in autumn 1943. The manufacturing process was distributed across multiple facilities for security. The steel shells were machined at a precision engineering works in Birmingham. The explosive filling took place at Station XV under controlled conditions. The chocolate coating was applied by hand. Each device required approximately 2 hours of work from start to finish. Quality control was absolute. Every device was weighed, measured, inspected for flaws in the chocolate coating or wrapper, then tested without explosive filling to ensure the detonation mechanism functioned reliably. Only after passing all inspections did a device enter inventory. The distribution plan focused on high value.
SOE agents received the devices with specific handling instructions. They were told to position them where they would be discovered rather than directly offered, because an offered gift might raise suspicion, but a stolen item carried psychological weight. The target would believe they'd acquired something valuable through their own initiative. This made consumption far more likely. The first documented deployment occurred in North Africa during early 1944. An SOE operative placed several bars of explosive chocolate in a Wehrmacht supply depot near Tunis. The devices were positioned to appear as if they'd been overlooked during a previous inventory. 3 days later, a German logistics officer discovered them. He kept 2 bars, distributed the others to junior officers. None of the devices detonated. The investigation that followed revealed a manufacturing defect in that particular batch. The pressure switches had been set too high. The targets had broken off pieces of chocolate without applying sufficient force to trigger the mechanism. The devices were recovered by German bomb disposal teams, photographed,
analyzed, then disseminated as a warning throughout Axis commands. This failure actually amplified the weapon's effectiveness, because now German security knew the chocolate existed, but they couldn't determine which bars were genuine and which were explosive. Wehrmacht orders from April 1944 specifically prohibited personnel from consuming any found chocolate, regardless of apparent authenticity. Italian commands issued similar directives. The psychological impact had been achieved.
Even real chocolate became dangerous because soldiers couldn't trust their own perception. The explosive chocolate existed in parallel to similar devices developed by American and German intelligence services. The Americans created their own version, designated as the Mark III edible explosive device. But American planners focused on Asian.
The total production run of number 73 remains partially classified. Declassified documents indicate between 800 and 1,200 devices were manufactured between 1943 and 1945. Not all were deployed. Some remained in storage until after the war. Others were used for training purposes, teaching agents how to handle and position the devices safely. The cost per unit was substantial, approximately 35 pounds sterling in 1943 currency. That's equivalent to roughly 2,000 pounds today. This made each device more expensive than a standard infantry rifle, but the potential strategic value justified the expense, because eliminating a single high-ranking officer could disrupt operations across an entire command structure. The explosive chocolate never achieved a confirmed kill. Yet military historians consider number 73 to be one of the most successful psychological weapons of the war, because its existence created constant anxiety among Axis forces. It forced the implementation of elaborate security protocols. It made ordinary objects suspicious. It transformed the act of eating into a potential threat. This was asymmetric warfare at its most refined. A handful of devices that cost thousands of pounds to produce created security burdens that consumed millions in enemy resources. After the war, most explosive chocolate devices were destroyed. A small number were retained for historical purposes. 3 examples exist in the Imperial War Museum's collection. They're kept in secure storage, displayed occasionally in special exhibitions. But museum staff treat them with extreme caution, because the pressure switches and detonators are still functional after 80 years. These devices represent a moment when warfare moved beyond conventional boundaries, when the familiar became dangerous, when trust itself became a vulnerability that could be weaponized. The explosive chocolate demonstrated that sometimes the most effective weapon isn't the one that kills the most enemies. It's the one that makes every enemy question their own perception of safety. That legacy continues to influence covert operations planning today, because once you understand that anything can be a weapon, nothing can be completely trusted.